Brian O'Day, our guest, he's a television producer. He has a legitimate job today. He was once a top-of-the-line drug smuggler, pretty much.
Definitely much.
Big rep. Where were the Hells Angels and all of those in all of this?
Well, the Hells Angels were around, but they weren't in the business quite as much as they are today. They certainly moved into when the pot business became localized and it wasn't a foreign business,
Right.
the Hells Angels moved in tremendously.
Okay, so take me back. The hospital room, you have the heart attack, you decide you're going to get clean and sober, remain clean and sober.
Right.
You become a drug and addiction counselor.
Yeah.
Talk about what you know, what you knew, and one day the DEA knocks on your door.
The DEA showed up. I was lying in bed waiting to go to work, and I was thinking about this guy who had just come in the night before, a heroin addict, and I wanted to get in there with him. And a knock hit my door. I was lying down, my eyes were closed, and honestly, Fanny, I knew who was at the door without moving an inch. I just knew that knock. That had a ring to it that sounded like the cops. And I rolled over and I looked, and through the slats in the blinds on the doorway, they were on a doorway by my deck, I saw guns, 2 guns. And I said, that's the cops for sure, because there's no one who doesn't like me enough to show up with guns other than cops.
Let's hope.
So I went and opened the door, and they were standing there with their badges in their hands like this, 2 of them, and their guns down by their side. And one guy said, "Are you Brian O'Day?" And I said, "I wish I wasn't, but I am." And he said, "May we come in?" And I said, "Well, you've got the gun."
How civilized.
And he said, "Do you have any guns?" "No, I don't." "And do you mind if we bring some people down?" I said, "Knock yourself out." And the next thing, 8 people came rolling down my stairs, and for the next few hours, they had my attention.
I bet. And went to trial and sentenced to 10 years in, what was the prison, Spring Hill?
Terminal Island.
Terminal Island
Los
in LA?
Angeles Harbor, in Long Beach.
First day in.
First day in, it was a nightmare. I was a self-surrender. I was one of those people that the judge says, "I'm going to give you 3 months to get your life together. You need to show up at this date." I actually wasn't ready on that date. I showed up a month late. I got permission for that month at the last minute, fortunately. But when I show up, I rang the doorbell at this giant prison, and a guy looked down from a tower and he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I'm here to check in." He said, "Check in?" Sorry. Right. "Yes, check in. I'm here to serve 10 years. And you walked up here? Wait right there."
You're a good private school boy.
That's right.
Well trained. Good family,
you
a
gotta
Canadian
show
family.
Up. You have to show up.
Especially when the DEA's on your tail.
That's right.
Drug Enforcement Administration.
That's right.
For.
And my name is spelled O''DEA, interestingly enough. But it took them an hour and a half to come and get me at the gate. They had to stop movement on the yard, which they do when any prisoners get checked in and they cross the yard. They're afraid that you might need protective custody, so they stop prisoners from being able to cross a line so they could get at you to hurt you if someone in there doesn't like you. So when I walked in that place, they cuffed me up to walk me in through the yard. There were 500, 600 guys behind this line of guards that were stopping movement, and everything I was afraid of was in that line. All the tattoos, the do-rags, the white power group, the La Familia, they were all there, and they were all looking to see who I was, and I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to make this.
And who protected you, or who didn't protect you?
You know, a fellow in there who was a Canadian found out who I was, found out I was a Canadian, and he got word to me to get in touch with him the moment I got out of A&O, administration and orientation. And when I got out, I looked him up, and he got me good clothes, because all the clothes they issued me were all used and damaged goods. And he helped me get settled in there.
And he said to you something like, it may not have been him, but he says something to you, if you want to make it out of here, you want to survive in here, there's things you need to stay away from.
The 3 Gs, gambling, gumps, and geezing. And that means don't gamble in prison, because it ends you up in trouble. Gumps was the prison term for gay people. If you want AIDS, go for it. And geezing is shooting heroin, and there was an awful lot of heroin in prison. In the U.S. prison. In the U.S. prison, the drug of choice was heroin.
How does it, other story, other day.
How does it get in?
How does heroin get into the prisons?
Guards and visiting room.
And you pay for it, or how does that work?
Yes, huge.
Huge. Well, how do you get money in prison?
Well, there's There's a number of ways, and there's a game always going on in prison. A game is a game of cards. They use, in where I was in Terminal Island, there was always 50 or 60 grand on the table at all times, and they used cards for money. And they had guys at the table who guaranteed the pot, and if you lost, their people on the outside went to your family to collect. And if you won, their people on the outside went to your family and dropped the money off, and they guaranteed the pot for 10% of the pot. They guaranteed you'd get your money.
So there was a bit of bonding. There must have been a little bit of male bonding.
Just a little. There were 1,300 of us in a space built for 400, so the bonding, you were forced very closely together.
Bunk on top of bunk?
In some of them, the bunks were 3 high and 1 on the floor in a cell. Where I lived in Terminal Island, I lived in what was called the freeway, which was just a row of bunks outside in a hallway. Every hallway, every stairwell, every single available space had bunks.
How different from a Canadian federal prison?
Canadian federal prisons are much more violent than American federal prisons.
See, that's shocking to many. It was shocking to me when you told me in the green room, because we have this perception, certainly, that a U.S. prison is where you don't want to be, especially a federal prison.
U.S. federal prisons are, you end up in a U.S. federal prison because of the type of crime you commit. It's either a drug crime or a crime against money, most of the time. You end up in a federal prison in Canada because of the amount of time you get. You get more than 2 years, you go to a federal prison. The people who get more than 2 years in Canada in prison are normally invasive people. They're
abusers,
bad boys,
murderers.
Yes, there are people who are in your face, stealing your stuff or beating you up, and that's not the case in federal prisons in the U.S. So
So more military model in the U.S.?
The U.S. everything is yes sir, no sir. You call the guards sir. In Canada, that was the first thing I noticed. By the way, funny you should mention it. When I got sent to a Canadian prison from a U.S. prison, I noticed all the guards, all the prisoners were calling them by their first names. I thought, wow. This is unbelievable. It was so, prisoners run the joints in Canada. And
How bored were you in prison?
I wasn't bored because I wrote and wrote and wrote.
So you wrote the journal, wrote the diary.
It became the book. And when I ended up in Canada, I became the chairman of the inmate committee. And that, I wouldn't recommend, if you ever find yourself there, don't take that job.
I don't plan to.
No, you can't please both of those masters.
There are things I'd like to do in life. I would not like to be an inmate.
That's what Kevin O'Leary said to me when we put him in jail for a day. He said, imagine, some people have to do that for a year or so. And I said, I can't imagine that. I actually have done that.
Exactly, and we don't mean to make it all Hollywood, because it must have been a horrendous experience at many levels.
It's not Hollywood at all when you're in it, because when you're in it, your mind is in it, and that's the enemy. We say this is radio station KF blank K, because everything that can go wrong goes wrong in my mind. Mark Twain said 99% of the battles I fought never took place. Okay? That's what happens when you walk up to prison.
Sure, the power of the mind. Well, you were on the radio once.
I was.
You were an open line host, so was I.
Yeah, it was an awesome
During
job.
Joyce Smallwood's reign.
That's right.
So things came easy to you, really, because you got a radio gig like, what, went in, said, look, I'd be good at this, I'm a yapper, give me an audition?
They were hurting in the morning, and I went in believing I could do it. And I told them that I could do it. Just try me. I mean, what do you got to lose? You're already losing.
Right.
You need something in that slot. And so what they did was they said, okay, Mr. Wise Guy. They did a closed circuit one just in the studio with guys who worked in the studio, and they phoned me as if it was on air. And I handled it all. So Colin Jameson, who was the president of the network at the time, said, can you start Monday? And this was Friday. And I said, you bet.
I said, you bet. The ad that went not quite round the world, but certainly
it did go around
in a lot of places it did.
Yeah.
So you put an ad in the newspaper when you got out of prison.
Yes, I did. In 2001, I ran an ad in the National Post with the headline, Former Marijuana Smuggler. Having recently completed a 10-year sentence for successfully importing 75 tons of pot into the United States, I now seek a legal means to support myself and my family. And I listed attributes that I had gotten in that business that I feel could be cross-pollinated into the legitimate world. And as a result, I got 600 responses from all over the world. and job offers from every police agency in North America.
I bet.
mean, it was bizarre. Every day, just stacks of mail. I had no idea that would happen. But as a result, I was a guest on the Mike Bullard Show, a nightly talk show.
Sure.
There was a guy on that show who was a co-star in one of Steven Seagal's movies, and they had developed a documentary pitch, a pilot for a series, a docudrama series, that they were trying to get a network to take. And he asked me if I knew anyone in the business in Canada, and I said, I do, as a matter of fact, know someone at CTV. He said, you want to see if you can pitch this? So I pitched it, and we got the show.
Was that Creepy Crazy?
Creepy Canada.
Creepy Canada, not Creepy
Yes,
Crazy.
a
Creepy
paranormal
Canada.
series. So we took you all around North America and told you ghost stories and reenactments and stuff, and it was fun.
And Redemption Inc.?
And the Redemption Inc. came last year. It was like my life experience landed on the head of a pin. It's a series that's a cross between The Dragon's Den and The Apprentice for ex-cons. Kevin O'Leary is the host. I'm his on-screen advisor, and I'm an associate producer. And my experience from being behind bars, my experience with ex-offenders, my experience speaking in prisons today as I do, and my experience as a television producer just went right here. Unbelievable.
Kismet.
Kismet, and what a show.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much
I'm
for
so
having
glad
me.
you're out of that joint and all smartened up.
Thank you.
Right?
Yeah.
Brian O'Day,
hope so.
hi, Confessions of a Pot Smuggler. You can see him on Redemption Inc. Mondays at 9 on CBC TV.